Hello everybody, welcome back to Neuroscience. We already went through the medulla, so let's go to another level and start with the pons. So the pons is going to be in the hindbrain, and it lies right between the midbrain and the medulla. So where it lies is in the posterior cranial fossa, right on the clivus, and that's anterior to the cerebellum. So right here, right here. And on either side, the pons are going to be continuous as the middle cerebral peduncle, and it is going to be the bridge between the cerebellar hemisphere. So here's the cerebrum. Here's going to be that bridge. Here are the pons. So the Pontine nuclei are going to make up the gray matter, and then the white matter are going to be all the tracts. Okay, so on the ventral surface of the pons, there is going to be striation due to the pontocerebellar fibers. On the median plane or eminence, there's going to be the basilar artery. So that one's really important. Remember, the basilar artery is basically the only highway to the brain, the only blood supply to the brain, once it's connected to the vertebral artery and everything. But it's the main artery that really supplies the entire brain. Okay, so the cranial nerve number 5, the trigeminal nerve, is going to be attached by the small motor and the large sensory root. So here's the motor in the front, sensory in the back. And then at the pontomedullary junction, there is going to be cranial nerves 6, 7, 8, and then the nervus intermedius. And then on the dorsal surface, there is going to be the cerebellum and the fourth ventricle. So right here, it's kind of like resected. Here's the stria medullaris. There's the median plane or medial eminence. And here are all the tracts. Okay, so like I said, the basilar artery is the straight shot to the head. And they connect with the vertebral arteries. But more importantly, the vertebral arteries are going to supply, or they're going to branch off into the posterior inferior cerebral artery, and that's going to supply the posterior portion of the cerebellum. And the anterior internal carotid artery is going to supply part of the pons right here, along with the superior cerebellar artery. So they're going to supply while they're going back and terminating in the cerebellum. So the superior border of the pons are going to be the cerebellar peduncles, and then the superior cerebellar arteries. The inferior is going to be the upper medulla, and then that's going to be the inferior cerebellar arteries. So it's right here. These two are going to supply it, along with some branches of the basilar artery. Okay, so inside the ventral or basilar part is going to be continuous to the pyramids of the medulla. So we'll talk about the clinicals correlations that are going to be really, really important due to that. So it is going to be above. So this is above the decussation. And on either side is going to be the middle cerebellar peduncle. And then the longitudinal bundle of fibers, they're going to be your cortical, pontine, and the cortical nuclear or cortical spinal fibers. So they're going to be bilateral. The transverse fibers are going to cross to make the cerebellar peduncle, and the pontine nuclei are going to be scattered. The pontine nuclei will form the cortical pontocerebellar path, so it connects the cortex to the pons to the cerebellum, and they will decussate, so they're going to cross and supply the cerebral hemisphere of the opposite side. So here we go. At the pons level, you see your fourth ventricle. You're going to see the nuclei of the trigeminal nerve. So on the outside, that's motor. Inside is going to be sensory. Superior cerebellar peduncle, they're going to be cut. And inside, you're going to be paying attention to the tracts right here. And the nuclei, they're just going to be scattered around. Laterally are going to be your middle cerebellar peduncle, and like basically in the very center is going to be your medial lemniscus. Remember, medial lemniscus is going to be your tract for motor or voluntary motor movements. That made sense. Oh well, sorry. So here's the fourth ventricle. Like as you can see right here, here are your cerebellar peduncles. So up here would be your superior cerebellar peduncles because it's right next to the fourth ventricle. Okay, so here is a little bit more detail with the tracts. So here's going to be cranial nerve number 7. The nuclei is going to be here. It's going to loop around. Here's cranial nerve number 6. So there's the abducens. It's going to come out here. And the corticospinal tract is going to pass like right through it. Okay, so in the dorsal or tegmental part, it's going to be the upwards continuation of the medulla, excluding the pyramids. So it's going to be made out of the motor and alar plates. So there's going to be, there should be basal, but that's motor, alar, sensory. There's going to be the nuclei of cranial, there should be an N nerve, 5, 6, 7, 8, as we already went through. There's going to be a decussation of the trapezoid body. So keep that in mind. It's trapezoid, not pyramid. Pyramid is below. And all of this forms part of the rhomboid fossa. Remember, the rhomboid fossa includes the cerebellum and the fourth ventricle. So here are all your tracts. Here's your fourth ventricle, and here is their trapezoid body. So it's right past the medial lemniscus, or past posterior to the. No, this would be anterior. It would be anterior to the medial lemniscus, and these are going to be all the Pontine nuclei. Here is cranial nerves 5. This is trigeminal nerve. Sensory up here, motor right here. So there's another nice picture of it. This is going to be the caudal part, and it's cutting through the facial colliculi. So this is going to be cranial nerve number 7. It loops around cranial nerve number 6, and then like gets spit out. So the gray matter is going to be the nuclei of those main cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 6 is going to lie beneath the facial colliculus, which literally means just kind of like a tract, in the floor of the fourth ventricle, and is lateral to the medial longitudinal bundle. More importantly, the motor nucleus of the facial nerve is going to lie like ventrolateral to the abducens nucleus, and the fibers of the facial nerve will make the main tract, or the facial colliculus. Okay, so superior salivatory, inferior salivatory, and lacrimatory nuclei will lie medial to the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. So you got to find the looping of the nerve. So if you find or the curving of cranial nerve number 5, it medial to it, so more towards the center, would be the main salivatory and lacrimatory nuclei. And the nucleus of the tractus solitarius is going to be lateral to the superior salivary nucleus, which is going to be here, and the vestibular nuclei lies lateral to lies beneath the vestibular area in the floor of the fourth ventricle, so like it's going to be kind of covered by the fourth ventricle. The dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei are going to be like dorsal and ventral to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, so it's more towards the back, like caudally, and to the side, so ventral. The spinal nucleus of cranial nerve number 5 and the tract are going to be in the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So that's all. Like, these are all the other bits. Here are the motor nuclei of the basal nerve. Vestibular nuclei is right here. Hypoglossal nucleus is right here. Here's the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So in this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle, but it's just like resected. And here is the cranial nerves going through. Right here would be the cerebellar commissure, so that would be like this part. It divides the two hemisphere of the cerebellum. So the white matter, simply enough, is just really where the trapezoid body is, because that's the decussation of the cochlear nuclei, and those are myelinated. So right here, decussation. Okay, so the gray matter of the cranial part is going to be only cranial nerve number 5 at this level. And in the back, there's going to be something called the locus ceruleus. It means blue. And it's blue because it makes melanin and epinephrine, or norepinephrine. Then right in front of it is going to be the raphe nucleus, and that secretes serotonin. The ventral tegmentum area is going to make dopamine, and the nucleus and accumbens kind of integrates everything together. So gray matter is going to be made out of both parts of the trigeminal nerve, and the principal sensory nucleus of cranial nerve number 5 is going to be once again lateral to the motor nucleus. Okay, so white matter continued. There is going to be the lateral and spinal lemniscus. For the trigeminal lemniscus, the trigeminothalamic, so it's going to go to the thalamus, is going to be between the medial lemniscus and the spinal lemniscus. The ventral part of the tegmentum posterior to the basilar part has 4 lemnisci. So there's going to be the medial, the trigeminal, the spinal, and the lateral. So here is the motor nucleus of the trigeminal. So we can guess right here would be the sensory nucleus of the trigeminal. Here's the 4th ventricle. So right here would be the medial longitudinal bundle. Then the tectospinal, then the rubrospinal. Here is the spinal lemniscus. Here's going to be the medial lemniscus, and here would be the trapezoid body. Here are your pontine nuclei. Here are your cortical and corticospinal and cortical nuclear fibers. And here would be your middle cerebellar peduncle. Blood supply is basically the same as the medulla. There's going to be the basilar artery, all of those branches, the pontine arteries, which are going to be just just the main branch of the basilar artery, and those branch off into the perimedium arteries, the short circumferential arteries, and the labyrinthine artery. Labyrinth supplies the labyrinth in the ear. And the vascular syndromes of the Pons was going to be mostly caused by a thrombosis or emboli of either the vertebral artery or the pontine arteries. In really bad cases, it would be the actual basilar artery itself, but that would have far greater consequences. Okay, let's go through the interesting stuff. Millard-Gubler syndrome is going to be a lesion in the lower part of the pons, in particular the medial inferior pontine area. So there's going to be an ipsilateral medial squint, and that's going to be it's going to be ipsilateral to the lesion. So if I have a lesion on the right side, my eyes are going to be my right eye is going to be deviating inwardly. So they're going to inward there. There's going to be ipsilateral facial palsy. So sticking with the right, my right face would be paralyzed, but from eye down, my eyes would still be able to coordinate because it's in the lower part of the pons. So, and the trigeminal nerve would be affected. However, my abducens and part of the upper part of the trigeminal nerve would not be affected, so my eyes would still be able to blink in sink, my eyebrows would be able to be raised, but like the moving of the eyes would be affected. So there's going to be contralateral hemiplegia instead, because, like I said, the pons are above the medulla, so it's going to affect the motor tract, because the motor tract is going to be below. Ooh, I almost knocked that over. It's going to be below the pons, and it's going to be a downstream effect, right? Another effect is that there's going to be deviation, tongue deviation to the right, because the hypoglossal nerve is going to be affected. Okay, in the pontocerebellar angle syndrome, there's going to be compression of the pons and the cerebellum, and that can be due to a neuroma in the acoustic canal. So there's going to be a small tumor made out of like the myelin and here we go, the Schwann cells. So it's going to press onto the caudal part of the pons, and that's going to affect the lateral lemniscus. So there's going to be a loss of pain and temperature sensation. There's going to be a loss of the cochlear reflex, of course, because it's in the acoustic canal. So the person is going to hear tinnitus, so constant ringing, progressive deafness as it gets larger, and a vertigo because the vestibular nerve is going to be affected. There's going to be the ipsilateral staggering and ataxia, so problems with the coordination due to the compression of the cerebral peduncle, along with the problems with the vestibular cochlear nerve. There's going to be a ipsilateral motor neuron type of facial palsy. So since it's a lower motor neuron, it's going to be like that picture before. It's going to be below the eye, right? And there's once again loss of pain and temperature, and the loss of the corneal reflex, because cranial nerves number 5 and 7 are going to be affected. So in the corneal reflex, you either blow in the patient's eye, which is not recommended anymore. That's kind of unsanitary. But you use like a tiny bit of cotton, like a wisp, right? And if you go and just barely touch the eye, the normal reflex is the person is going to blink. But this person would not, the patient being affected with the pontocerebellar angle syndrome, they're not going to feel that. So they're not going to blink. In a Pontine hemorrhage, usually due to the basilar, basilar is going to be like very extensive and is bilateral. The anterior inferior cerebellar artery, so remember how it was kind of like arching over the pons, that would like greatly affect it as well. So the signs are going to be pinpoint pupil. When you shine a light in the patient's eyes, take it away, there's not going to be adjustment, right? Hyperpyrexia, the person's going to run a very high temperature due to the pons being unable to control the body temperature. Deep coma, because this is pretty extensive. Bilateral paralysis of the face and limbs. It's because like a lot of brain structures are affected because it's the basilar artery. Remember, it's not just the pontines or the pontine arteries being affected. If the basilar artery is involved, everything is affected. And as you can see here, it's a pretty big one. Okay, so astrocytomas are going to be the most common tumors of the pons, like of just the pons. There's a bunch of other diseases that involve the pons, but it also involves like the medulla and the cerebellum. But this is going to be the only one that affects, or is going to be the most common one that affects the pons. Occurs in childhood, and signs and symptoms depends on the area affected. So if it's closer to the medial lemniscus, there's going to be ataxia. If it's closer to, let's say, the nuclei of the trigeminal nerve, so that's going to be like facial palsy, loss of corneal reflex. So it's going to depend. Okay, so that's it for now. Thank you for your attention, and good luck studying.